Hey, this is Christian with Forest of Arden Healing Arts and Yoga Bear Box. And this is part two of a two-part series on aging in connective tissue. In this part, I want to talk about strategies for healing and stretching your connective tissue and for keeping it healthy as you get older. In part one, I said that one of the theories of aging holds that we lose function and vitality in our tissues when cross-links form between the fibers. Proteins, structural molecules, and DNA develop detrimental chemical bonds, cross-links to each other. This decreases their functionality. In connective tissue, for example, fascia, it causes the fibers to adhere to each other. One cause of aging is an accumulation of injury and scar tissue in connective tissue, especially in fascia. The adhered fibers and ground substance become matted, brittle, and disorganized. They lose their correct alignment, thereby weakening the structure they are supporting and making the possibility of continued injury more likely. The hardened ground substance causes waste products to accumulate and floods the body with toxicity. These points become hypersensitive and they shoot pain when they are touched. These are called trigger points. And the accumulation of trigger points wreaks havoc in one's body. This is the basis for fibromyalgia. And they riddle the body with pain and discomfort. In the face of pain, many people move even less, which makes the situation worse. The fascia tightens even more, tears even more easily, and more trigger points form. Now, almost all people suffer this as they get older. And again, as I said in my first video, this is not from the passage of years, but from the accumulation of poor postural and movement patterns and consequent injuries. This is the condition in connective tissue that breaks down its organization, introduces entropy, and causes aging and moves one towards death. In order to stay healthy and to heal your connective tissue, the connective tissue needs to be moved. It needs a body worker to go in with her fingers, thumbs, and elbows into your connective tissue. For the trigger points mentioned above, the body worker can work directly on them and fix them. And I'm going to show you next a few moves working on Annie. Structural bodywork is the bodywork that penetrates directly to the problem part. It gets right into the connective tissue, into the ground substance, onto the fibers. It heats up the ground substance and it separates the fibers, and then it aligns the fibers using the cross-fiber friction. So I'll just show you a couple of strokes that could be used, say, on somebody's upper back. First, the superficial fascia can be stretched with fist strokes. And those can be continued down the back. Next, muscles, and remember that muscles are surrounded by connective tissue. So whenever you're touching a muscle, you're touching all of the connective tissue that is surrounding the muscle and in fact surrounding each muscle fiber. So connective tissue goes all the way down to the microscopic level in muscles. So I can place my fingers here to the other side of the spine, to this side of the paraspinals, and I can slowly move the paraspinal muscles away from the spine and work through them, looking through the areas where they are tight. I'm working directly into the person's upper back tension. And I could do that both sides and up and down the spine. Then I can take my thumb and say that I have found a trigger point somewhere around here. I can feel it because it's matted, it's hard, it's different from the tissue around it, I can set my thumb right down onto the trigger point. Now in this case, the fibers are going this way. So my move is going to be across the fibers. So I'm going to settle down in there, find the trigger point, and then move my thumb in this way. And you can barely see it moving because it only has to move a little bit very slowly. Now, if that hurts the person a lot, then I back up. So the pain is always my guide here. If it doesn't hurt, then I can go ahead and go all the way to the hard until I find when the problem is and work there. And in that way, I can work trigger points all over the back. I can also grab, say, the shoulders. So when we're grabbing muscle, remember that we are also grabbing loads, tubes of connective tissue. So I'm holding the muscles of her shoulder here between my thumb and fingers, but I'm also holding her connective tissue. And if I set my thumb slowly to move across those fibers and across, say, the top of her scapula right here, I'm working these connective tissues that are tight from having the shoulder so high all the time. And I can also move back and forth there. And so I can work all around the shoulder. Using the same principle, I can work in the gluteals, I can work in the hamstrings, the calves, any part of the body that I want using structural bodywork. Remember from the first video that the only cause of aging and subsequent death is entropy. Now, I'm not talking about fatal accidents or murder, of course, although that's another form of entropy, social entropy. Many people suffer this entropy in their connective tissue, and in most people, this is what ages them and eventually causes their death. There are, of course, life-threatening conditions and diseases that are not caused by how we treat our connective tissue, for example, MS or ALS, and we need well-trained doctors to handle these conditions. These are not topics of this video. However, I hold that deterioration of one's connective tissue is one of the primary causes of illness. It sets people up for conditions not only in the musculo-connective tissue system, but also in the organs. Problems in the connective tissue of the organ, of any organ, can start long before the organ shows symptoms. I mentioned a few in the first video, including cross-linked muscle and connective tissue fibers in the heart, or the blood vessels, or the lenses of the eyes. One does not usually consider the fibrous causes of heart attacks, hypertension, and vision problems. And even the abdominal and pelvic organs function well only if the fascia around them is healthy. Some of the abdominal organs are suspended from the back fascia by folds of connective tissue called mesentery. The organ's position can be altered if the mesentery is too tight in one direction or another. Their suspensory network is compromised or even destroyed through poor posture, weak connective tissue, or organ removal. A hysterectomy, for example, alters the position of the fascia in the other pelvic organs and even causes structural problems in the abdomen. Doctors who don't understand the integrity of abdominal fascial networks and don't realize that organ removal thereby accelerates aging through compromised organ systems, they might suggest organ removal without taking into consideration the consequences to the overall health of the body. And I could continue talking about the role of the fascia in all of the systems of the body, but we'd be here all day. It's that comprehensive. Let me just say that if structural bodywork is one cure for entropy in the connective tissue, the most ubiquitous tissue in the body, the tissue that unites all branches of medicine because all parts of the body are set in fascia, then why is it not practiced as a primary and preventative medicine? Why isn't everyone prescribed structural bodywork to heal their connective tissue? Why doesn't insurance pay for it? Or better yet, why don't we have socialized bodywork medicine? Okay, now you know that part of your solution lies in bodywork. Find a bodyworker and book an appointment. And there are many different types of bodywork that work with the connective tissue in different ways. Structural bodywork is only one type. There are also subtle release techniques such as craniosacral therapy, visceral manipulation. These also work directly with the connective tissue fibers, but very lightly. Their effectiveness is produced by their subtlety. If you cannot find a body worker, then you can work on yourself using these yoga tune-up balls. We have lots of videos on this YouTube channel showing you how to do it. And Yoga Tune-Up has also produced a book, many videos, and classes showing you how to use them to heal your connective tissues. Here is Annie to show you just one move as an example.
Here's a really basic self-massage technique using these plus-size yoga tune-up balls to give yourself an upper back massage right in between the shoulder blades. This is like the number one place where people want to just get in there and get a massage. So I'm keeping these balls inside of the tote that they come in. And this groove here is where I'm going to put the spinous processes of my spine so that the balls are going to roll on either side of the spine, the bridge of the spine. Placing the balls in between my shoulder blades right here, I'm going to lay down on top of these balls. The balls are on either side of my spine, upper back, and I'm going to interlace my hands behind my head just to lift my head a little bit so it's not dragging on the floor. But the first technique is to simply sink my entire body weight on the balls. So I'm not holding, I'm not doing an abdominal crunch, I'm not doing any tightening of my body. I am completely letting go of the weight onto those balls. So the balls are going to sink into the layers of connective tissue. And then once I feel like I have sunk through the soft connective tissue and I'm approaching the hard connective tissue, I can continue to sink. That's one technique. Another technique is to gently lift the head just so it's not dragging on the floor. And slowly pressing my feet into the floor, press my body up towards the head of the mat. And I'm going to massage along the line of those muscles in between my shoulder blades. Another technique I can do is let my hips drop on the floor, let my head drop on the floor, and gently, slowly, but with a lot of intention, rock my rib cage side to side. And that's how you approach self-massage techniques with these massage balls.
Considering the epidemic of connective tissue dysfunction in our societies and its role in aging, it is my opinion that every house should have a set of these yoga tune-up balls or similar fascia rolling balls in the same manner that they have a first aid kit or toothbrushes. It's basic physical hygiene to keep your fascia healthy. Another way to keep your connective tissue healthy is to stretch. Now, most people know basic stretching exercises, and if you need some ideas, you can find them, for example, in Bob Anderson's classic book on the subject, Stretching, now in its 47th year of publication. Or, of course, you could practice the physical postures of yoga, what is known as Hatha Yoga. As a system of stretching, strengthening, alignment, and balancing, yoga is one of the best ways to stay healthy throughout your life and into your later years. If practiced slowly and with a great deal of awareness, yoga can warm up the ground substance of all the fascia in the body and stretch, strengthen, and align the fibers. In this manner, yoga allows one to keep every single part of one's body healthy. In yoga, there are positions for every part of the body, and new positions or moves and flows are being developed every day. If you are older and have lots of accumulated tears and trauma in your connective tissue, stay away from the fast-moving styles of yoga. Stay away from Ashtanga, anything that says it is a vinyasa or flow or power yoga. You are almost certain to get injured in those classes. Connective tissue needs to be stretched slowly and consciously. Start with restorative yoga. Restorative yoga is the practice of supporting the body with enough props, for example, bolsters and blocks, so that the brain can let go of tight muscles. This world we all live in, full of anxiety and violence, causes us to tighten our muscles in an attempt to armor against the struggle of life. The first step to healthy connective tissue is to let go of your muscles. You can do this with restorative yoga. For example, here Annie is going to show you one restorative yoga pose.
Here's a restorative pose that is wonderfully healing for the lower back and a myriad of lower back issues that people can have. Now, the thing about restorative yoga is the more props and the more bolsters and the more blankets and pillows that you have, the better. So you want to gather to your mat all of the spare bolsters, blankets, everything that you have, so that when you start to build up your poses, if you need a little bit of extra support, you can pull it in. Now I'm going to show you that as an example here. So here's the setup for this lower back reclining supported twist pose. So you want a pretty significant size bolster just perpendicular and right up against your hip. Then this other leg, you're going to bend it back. Don't worry, we're not going to be here in this position for very long. Then you rotate your rib cage over this bolster, and then you are going to climb down onto this bolster. And you want to make it so that your rib cage is really supported on the bolster, and then let go. However, if this doesn't feel high enough for you, you add more height. Now, how do you know if it doesn't feel high enough for you? If you feel like you're still gripping in your lower back, or your pelvis is grumpy, or you're kind of gripping or holding on to something, you need more height. So I'm going to use this extra bolster and build it up. So same thing here. I'm going to twist my rib cage, get a little bit of lift out of my hips, and then climb down, rest my torso on this bolster, and then I'm going to let go of everything here. So even though my legs are still in this shape, nothing is holding or trying to hold on to the shape. I'm just completely resting in this position. And this is wonderfully gapping, but with a regenerative twist to the lower spine to help your neurological system and your brain to simply let go.
Now, to some of you, this may not look like yoga. It certainly is not the sort of thing one sees those Instagram influencers doing or yoga in the movies. But let me be clear. If you cannot let go of your tight muscles, you will not benefit from any yoga practice. You will reinforce injurious patterns, or worse, injure yourself during the yoga class. Now, obtaining the props will entail an expense, but it's worth it for the long term, and it is much cheaper than hospitalization. There are also many substitutes for these props, for example, sofa cushions for a yoga bolster. And you will need a trained teacher in restorative yoga to guide you. Then you can move into a Yin Yoga practice. This is a style where the goal is to stretch the connective tissue. Since connective tissue is viscoelastic, the slower you stretch, the more it stretches without injury. Yin Yoga moves slowly and holds poses for a long time. And here's Annie showing a yin Yoga approach to stretching.
Here's an example of a Yin Yoga pose for the back of the legs or the hamstrings. Now, the thing about Yin Yoga is that your setup is very important, and the props that you use are very important as well. And there's no scripted or perfect way to do a yin pose. You have to gauge with your internal perception about what is going on inside of your body, about which is the best form of the pose to do and which is the best setup with props. Now, I'm going to give you some guidelines, and there's so much more to learn about yin yoga, but here's just a basic understanding. So, for the hamstrings, I like to do one hamstring at a time. And I'm going to point my hips straight forward. I'm bending this knee out. Now, if this hurts your hips and you can't sit comfortably in this pose, then you would prop up this knee so that you don't even have to think about this, because we're focusing on this hamstring. The leg is extended straight out of the hips. And now we are going to bend forward. But for most people, this just immediately starts to annoy and kind of make the brain think that the lower back is going to be in trouble. So I love putting a bolster on my thigh. And then I'm going to allow my upper body to come forward, and the weight of my upper body leaning forward is going to create stress on the back of the hamstring and stretch that connective tissue. And now the goal is that you want to let go of every other part of your body that is not being stretched. So I'm going to let go of my arms and my shoulders and my head and my neck, my back, my hips. And I'm going to hold this pose for anywhere between 2 to 5 to 10 minutes, depending on your level of flexibility. And I'm going to meditate on letting go. Just completely letting go of everything in this pose.
Yin Yoga requires patience to hold the poses. It's a meditation that requires awareness to let go with the stretch. And since we store emotional pain and trauma in our connective tissue, Yin Yoga can tap into those feelings. It's not uncommon for people to have an emotional release during a Yin pose. Older people have lived a longer life and may be storing lots of emotional hardening in their fascia. That's how you made it through. When you come to the mat in a Yin practice, you'll need time to unravel those years. Once you feel comfortable doing an hour of Yin Yoga without injury, then you can move into other styles of yoga that require more strength in the pose. For example, Iyengar is a good next style because it trains good alignment in the body, something that will be needed to avoid injury as you age. Another way to make your connective tissue healthy is to become aware of maladaptive movement patterns and limitations. Two excellent systems for this are Feldenkrais and MoveNat. Feldenkrais is a system of developing awareness of one's soma and self through movement. Movements are broken down into their component parts and repeated as an awareness exercise, bringing attention to how one holds one's body and how one moves it. There are no hard calisthenics or difficult poses requiring lots of strength. Instead, Feldenkrais works using small, light movements to send specific sensory information to your brain about each movement, and through this repetition opens up the possibility of change. For example, to discover if I hold my head tight at its base, I could break down the movements in my head into the 3 planes. So for example, I could move my head like this in the yes gesture, and then like that in the no gesture, and then side to side like that. And so what I'm doing is I've broken down the movements in my head into these 3 planes, and I'm repeating them consciously so that I can feel, for example, as I do this, I can tell that on this side of my neck, it's tighter. And I think that probably has to do with the fact that this is my mousing arm. So now that I've become aware of that, I can bring that to my desk as I'm writing. I can think, oh, let me let go of this side of the arm, and that will free up that side. So this is what Feldenkrais does. It breaks things down into small, repeatable movements and increases your kinesthetic information and awareness. If unconsciously repeated movement sets up maladaptive sensory engrams, then consciously repeated movements allows us to reset them. For Moshe Feldenkrais, who developed this system, Unaware somas lack maturity. So while one may have lived many years, one's body might still lag behind in maturity. Movement therapy matures one. A newer form of movement therapy is MoveNat. A MoveNat has broken down movements into basic skills and it trains those skills. It asks the body to work through a list of competencies such as rolling over, sitting up, rotating the legs and the hip joints, kneeling, squatting, crawling, getting up, jumping, lifting, carrying, climbing, pulling oneself up, vaulting, and balancing. In MoveNat, one trains each of these movements starting from whatever level of competency one has. The movements are then stacked and executed in more and more challenging locations, such as on a balance beam, on boulders, or in trees. The MoveNat Elements class and Level 1 training are in themselves already good starting points for most levels of fitness. And MoveNat has now developed classes specifically for people who are rehabilitating their body. This form of MoveNat is especially useful for older people trying to revitalize their connective tissue. Now, since MoveNat requires some level of flexibility to do it, I strongly recommend starting with restorative and yin yoga and then coming over to doing MoveNat. Now let's think about how to schedule and progress through this revitalization and healing of your connective tissue. As you work on your connective tissue health using bodywork, yoga, and movement work, it is important to stay aware of how your body reacts to the work. If you injured your connective tissues throughout your life because you used your body unconsciously, doing a yoga program unconsciously will only continue the process of injuring you. So remember that you want to do all of this work in the zone of awareness. Your pain receptors are your safety gauges. They will tell you when you are stretching too far, working out too hard, or when the massage is too deep. If you turn off your pain receptors with painkillers, you risk injuring yourself again. If you don't get off the painkillers and replace their action with consciousness, you will find it difficult to do the work I'm suggesting without the risk of further injury. The painkillers, they're a dead end, literally. And especially don't take painkillers before getting structural body work or before a yoga session. By disabling the pain information, you risk tearing your connective tissue or muscle fibers. Your other gauge in this project of re-inhabiting and healing your body are your kinesthetic receptors, joint receptors, muscle spindles, Golgi tendon organs. They're receptors that tell you where and how you are in space. You specifically train these receptors using Feldenkrais or, say, Alexander movement techniques. Here is a logical and healthy schedule to follow. Let's assume that you are sedentary, stiff with muscle and connective tissue tension, and riddled with painful areas in your body. Let's start from there. If you are in better shape than that, then simply adjust my instructions accordingly. The principles are the same. Start with restorative yoga. Hold each position for as long as you can, up to 2 minutes at first. If you can't hold the position at all, then use more props, another bolster or a blanket or another brick, or place them differently to support you. If you can only hold for 30 seconds, then do that, and that's all for day 1. Do it again the next day, for as long as you can without feeling pain. As you practice restorative yoga, your muscles will let go, and you will feel more and more comfortable. Don't force it. That's what caused the problem in the first place. Soon you will be able to hold the positions for many minutes, even up to 10 minutes. Be aware that letting go of your muscle tension may also provoke an emotion. This will give you a clue about why you tightened up that area in the first place. Take time to work through these feelings. When you can successfully let go of your muscles in various restorative yoga positions, then you're ready for some yin yoga. Begin slowly, doing only a few poses at first. Now, if you do this at home, you can control your time. If you do it in a class, Don't be ashamed of doing only the first 15 minutes of the class. Tell the teacher you are working yourself back into shape. As you limber up, you can stay longer in the class. Stay fully aware of how your tissue responds. Pain and kinesthesis are your gauges. If during your progression you find that you can't practice yoga for a couple of weeks due to whatever pressures you have in your schedule, be especially aware when you come back to it. You may not be able to pick up safely where you left off. Aging connective tissue can recoil and tighten even more quickly than younger tissue. Again, it's not due to the years themselves, but to the accumulated injury and hardening. Work to the level that you can, even if you have to back off sometimes. And for women, note that your hormonal changes may also affect your connective tissue. If you are pre or postmenopausal, you need to consider those changes in your overall gauging of what you can do on any particular day. Once you can let go of tension and get a stretch on your connective tissue, then you are ready to bring strength and coordination into the mix. This is where you can start, say, an Iyengar yoga training or Move Nat training. And you will move through these practices with the same awareness and patience with your body as you did with restorative and yin yoga. Say you're doing a Move Nat practice in the beginning, and you're going to do this move here, where you drop your knees to one side and then to the other side. Now, this requires that the ligaments of your hips loosen up. It requires some coordination and competency, but to even do the move, it requires loose enough hips. And so, Move Nat holds that simply by doing the move and holding it, you warm up your connective tissue and you start to loosen your hips. So this hip in me is tighter. This one can go most of the way down. But this hip might take about 5 minutes for me to work on it and get it to go down. And if you achieve this in one session, don't expect that when you come back the next day, you're going to be able to pick up where you left off. So if you got your hips all the way down, your knees all the way down, don't expect that when you come back the next day, this would go down that easily. You might need to take those 5 minutes again to do it. And don't force it. Because between yesterday and today, between that session and this session, you certainly went through all the stresses and anxieties of your daily life. Work, money worries, anxiety, a pandemic that's rushing through our population, any number of things that could tighten up our hips. So treat each session on its own, be patient and aware with your body. Now, motivation attitudes, that get up and go discipline, they're good to get you off the sofa and onto the yoga mat, but they're not good on the mat, especially for older people. If you're like my father, and I must admit that his son didn't fall too far from the tree, you might angrily motivate yourself into action. You will yell at your hips for not achieving that pose. Don't do that, because it bypasses the delicate gauging mechanisms of your awareness. Concerning bodywork, you can receive structural bodywork at any point in this process. Your bodyworker will know never to push past the limits of your connective tissue. If you find that your massage therapist is working fast and deep, stop seeing him, because they're not well trained. Massage should never be done fast and deep. That tears connective tissue. Alternatively, if you are using the yoga tune-up balls to do self-massage, then you will need to gauge the depth and speed of the moves yourself. Use the same principles. Don't work into pain. Always start from where your connective tissue is at. A good rule of thumb is to sink the balls through the soft until you get to the hard and tight tissue. Work there. Don't push past that. If it lets go, then you can sink deeper. If it does not let go or it gets more painful, then back off and work not so deeply. Over time, your connective tissue will loosen and regain its vitality, but make sure to give it the time it needs to achieve that. Let me end by saying that to heal your connective tissue, to heal your back pain, frozen shoulder, carpal tunnel syndrome, etc., you may need to take time off work. Now, this is allowed to varying degrees in different countries. There's more of a possibility of that here in Europe. The United States still suffers under a brutal economic system that does not care for the bodies of its older people. You cannot heal your connective tissue without the time needed to do it. We need to vote in ways that construct governments of people who care about the health of their citizens and mandate more time off for healing. Otherwise, this just isn't going to work. And many of us will age quickly and die in pain or knocked out on fentanyl like my father did. We are also going to need to reorganize our societies, including our economic and political systems, according to the needs of our symptoms. Awareness of pain and tension should figure into government policy. Awareness leads to humane policies that give people what they need. Your connective tissue can only be healed if you are conscious and kind with your body. Our societies must also be conscious and kind.